Love and ghosts. At first glance, the concept of love and the concept of ghosts seem to be not only completely unrelated, but about as hilariously different as two concepts can be. Not that Jason Fendrick had spent much of his life thinking about either too closely, or how they related to one another. His simple, humdrum life, consisting of very few romantic experiences and no paranormal ones, had allowed his mind to focus on the day-to-day tasks of day-to-day living, and largely ignore the weightier, ethereal perceptions of life. But that had all changed the morning he decided to add a little spontaneity to his life. On his way home from his overnight shift, an impulse to try something different, something new, had seized him. He turned down the first dirt road he spotted in the early morning light, veering off his usual route along the main highway. It was after traveling down the road for some distance that he had spotted the crumbling old manor on top of a grassy hill. Jason had stared with surprise and slight confusion for a moment, before realizing that this must be the old Keenan place. The name had been tossed around in Jason's hometown his entire life, and for that matter, his parents' and his grandparents' lives as well. Jason had never bothered to see the ancient mansion before. He hadn't even known where it was located, but he did know it was something of a town treasure. It had been bought, sold, and almost renovated so many times, but something always seemed to happen to prevent anything being done to the place, to restore it or tear it down. And so, the towering, empty structure that had sat on that same hill for well over 100 years continued to exist, slowly eroding. The sequence of events that started with Jason's slow trek up the reed-choked ridge had reshaped his understanding of reality, and made apparent the common links between two concepts he had never before considered. Love and ghosts are the only two things in the world that can remain unaffected by time. Both can be described as an invisible presence that sometimes becomes clearly visible during the most unexpected moments. There are many people who don't really believe in one or both concepts, just as there are many others who have had experiences so vivid and breathtaking that they didn't just turn into true believers, but devoted their lives to pursuing a re-experience of their encounter. Such was now the case with Jason, a recent, fervent convert from a mild agnosticism towards the two concepts, to a true believer and seeker of both. And right now, he desperately needed them to work together. It all began in the old ballroom. Jason had entered the estate ruins through the front door, which was locked, but locked into rotten wood that had given way so easily, he never knew he had broken in. Upon entering the manor, a feeling of nostalgia swept over him. This being his first time in the home, he knew it wasn't a feeling of nostalgia for his own past, but one for the house itself. The grand entrance hall, now standing vacant and silent, had clearly once been full of life and people. Jason could almost see the parties that once filled the stately, elegant room, the music and laughter that must have often permeated the air, and the warm, crackling fires that used to occupy the now cold, bare hearth. It was a feeling of sadness and loneliness that hung heavy in the air. Jason had never been the type to be able to sense anything, but even he could not deny the feelings that bring them. The difference between sensing his own feelings and sensing the echo things long past was the first of many realizations Jason would have that day, the first epiphany that began a landslide of insights that would forever change his world. He picked his way across the floor gingerly at first, fearing weak floorboards that could give way at any time. But to his surprise, he found the floor to feel quite sturdy beneath his feet, and he was able to walk more quickly and confidently from room to room, as he explored the gargantuan manor. As this was an unplanned, impromptu visit, spurred by an uncharacteristic urge to try something new, he hadn't brought a flashlight with him. However, the mid-morning light spilling through the dusty windows provided more than enough illumination for him to clearly see everything. After several minutes of exploration through bedrooms layered with dust and a kitchen choked with cobwebs, Jason started to notice slight movements out the corner of his eye. Every time he turned his head, there was nothing. Sometimes there would be something that could possibly explain the movement detected, like a torn curtain gently wafting in the morning breeze through a broken window, or his own reflection in the dirty mirror inside the washroom. But there were a few times that there was absolutely nothing there that could explain the slight distortion he picked up just outside his range of vision. It was a little unnerving, but Jason's agnosticism towards the idea of ghosts had allowed him to avoid building any kind of real fear towards the paranormal during his life. If ghosts were real, he had reasoned, then they were immaterial and therefore harmless. This was a feeling strongly bolstered by the bright morning sunlight streaming in through all the windows. And so he had adventured on, stepping lightly from room to room in the sprawling first floor of the mansion. The second largest room he had encountered so far in his exploration appeared when he made his way to the very back of the house. This somewhat smaller but no less ornate room appeared to be a kind of entry hall for the back doors of the house, which were nearly as large as the double front doors. Jason continued to follow the irresistible allure of mystery the house offered, making his way towards yet another large set of double doors that no doubt concealed even more ancient secrets within. Unlike the front doors, which had been locked at one point, these doors had no lock at all, and the leftmost of the two opened easily to Jason's pull. Peering through the new opening, he stared in surprise, as it took his mind several moments to understand what he was seeing. It was not more dimly lit house interior that he saw, nor was it the outside. He realized he was staring at what had once been a massive ballroom, with glass walls made of square glass panels, and even a glass panel roof. Two decrepit chandeliers hung on rusty chains from the ceiling, which itself was missing just as many square glass panels as what remained. The walls had fared a little better, with over half of the thick glass panels remaining in place in the massive, round room. The foggy glass let in light well enough, so that even if there were none missing, the room would have been by far the brightest room of the mansion. The floor had clearly once been covered with large red and white checkered tiles, though the white tiles had all decayed to varying shades of grey, and most of the red tiles were so dirty they were nearly black. A short, wide staircase led down from the doorway Jason stood in, to the floor of the old ballroom. Jason had descended the staircase with awe, the feelings of the house behind him now seeming like a muted version of what he felt here. Here, it was the epicenter of everything he had sensed, a feeling of longing for times that he had never actually experienced. It must have been a marvelous thing long ago, to see a brightly polished, gleaming floor covered with dancing couples, each wearing elaborate, beautiful ballroom dancing attire. Now various vines and branches intruded into the ancient glass structure, as nature slowly and steadily reclaimed the area. All the people who had once laughed and danced across the floor, they were all gone. It was a concept that before this morning, Jason would have had no trouble with. Of course people die. Of course houses and even mansions eventually empty and collapse. How else could it be? And yet on this morning, the profound sadness of this fact weighed on Jason in a way he had never felt before. The juxtaposition of a silent, abandoned, collapsing ballroom with the idea that it was once a brimming focal point of human connection and happiness was suddenly understood, unexpectedly but fully comprehended by Jason. This concept, and the unpredicted feelings that accompanied it twisted and squirmed endlessly inside his brain, as he slowly walked across the large, vacant space. He was so deeply introspective that he almost didn't spot what was standing against one of the far walls. On a short, metal table, nearly totally covered in rust, was an old record player, with a record still on the platter. While the record player itself was choked with dust, and the wooden casing showed signs of rot, the record itself was spotless. There was no name on the record, it was just a simple, gleaming black disc. Whether out of morbid curiosity, or the actual hope that the record player would still work, Jason never knew. Whatever the reason, he watched himself press the button to start the disc spinning and move the tone arm onto the disc. For a just moment, there was no sound. Jason closed his eyes, trying to heighten his hearing. And then he heard the music. Not faint and faded and distorted, as he had expected, but loud, clear, and vibrant. The disc sounded like a brand new record, on a brand new record player. He opened his eyes. The chandeliers were brightly lit, filling the immaculate ballroom with warm light. Through the crystal-clear glass walls and ceiling, Jason could see a night sky filled with stars. Slowly looking downward, he stared with a kind of numb shock at the couples swirling about on the dance floor. The ballroom was absolutely filled with people laughing, dancing, talking, and eating. No one had yet noticed him, but a man wearing a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers was bound to attract attention in a ballroom, where all the other men wore old-style tuxedos, complete with coat tails and top hats. The women too, wore the most elaborate and beautiful ball gowns. Some even wore masquerade masks, but most did not. They were all talking and laughing and dancing. Still in a state of shock, Jason started to make his way towards the exit, trying to leave before he was seen, while at the same time knowing it was an impossible wish. There was simply no way he wouldn't be spotted before he left. The best he could hope for was only a few people to see him, and simply be confused by his presence before he got out of there. But adding to his surprise, as if he could feel that sense any more strongly, the people continued to ignore him, even as he walked through the center of the dance floor. One of the dancing couples unexpectedly stepped backward, right in front of Jason. As they turned and spun into him, Jason squeezed his eyes shut and tensed up, expecting to be tumbling to the floor in a moment. But the sensation Jason felt next wasn't a collision. It was a kind of tingling, electric feeling inside him. He opened his eyes to see he was still standing in the same place he was, and the couple was gone. He turned his head to see them still dancing on the other side of him, still completely unaware of his presence. He felt his mouth drop open. Had they gone through him? Were they ghosts? He felt for his body before jerking his head down quickly to see there was no body. He was there, he could see and hear everything perfectly, but there was no body below his head. There probably was no head either. He was just a presence. It suddenly dawned on him. The couple were not ghosts who went through him. He was the ghost who went through them. He blinked in disbelief, all the wild new changes too much to fully comprehend. No matter how closely he looked, his body was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't even see himself in the mirrors hanging on the walls of the ballroom. He couldn't feel his skin, or the weight of his body on his feet. He could still move like he was walking, but it felt more like he floating above the floor. He was both there, and not there. He looked around desperately, trying to make eye contact with anyone, his wish to not be seen only moments ago now horrifyingly coming true. Was he dead? Was he destined to remain this way forever? His head, or whatever spectral approximation of his head that existed now, was spinning, as he looked for a way out of the impossible situation. And then the music stopped. He was back in the vine and leaf-coated old ballroom, the mid-morning sunlight streaming in through the shattered glass roof. And he was completely alone. Jason's breath came in ragged gasps. He felt his chest, his stomach, his legs. It was all there. He was real again, flesh and blood. He was still standing where he had been, right in front of the record player, which was now standing silent before him. Before, in his vision, or whatever had happened, he was in the middle of the ballroom. But now here he was back in front of the record player. Did that mean none of it really happened? Was it just a vision or a dream? He decided it didn't matter. It was time to go. He turned toward the double doors he entered the ballroom through. But halfway up the steps, he stopped. Where was he going? Back to his house. So, he could do what, exactly? Watch TV? Keep working the same stale job, and slowly watch his life slip away. He had come here initially because he wanted something new, something different, and just because it ended up being far more intense than he expected, that was no reason to leave now. He was in no danger. Nothing had threatened him. He didn't understand what happened, but so far there had been nothing to fear. Ghosts maybe, but they weren't the scary, angry kind. They were the regular people kind. People that appeared to be enjoying their lives far more than he enjoyed his. And he knew whatever magic was at play here, would not be here again. There were times in Jason's life when he just knew things. Like when he entered a room after his parents had been arguing. The silence, the heaviness in the air, he just knew he had interrupted an argument without ever hearing a word from either of them. It was kind of like that now, a feeling of certain knowledge that settled over him. He could leave, go back to his life, and that would be the end of it. He could return to the manor later, but everything would be cold and dead and gone. The record player wouldn't work the same way, if it was even still there at all. This was his one opportunity, to dive into something he would never get a chance to do again. He thought back to the ballroom party, the most terrifying and beautiful experience of his life. Everyone seemed so happy there. Everyone was so connected with each other. They all appeared to be having the time of their lives, dressed to the nines and dancing without a care in the world. He had never been that happy and carefree. Slowly, he walked back down the stairs. One more time. The record seemed to be the key to it all. As long as the music played, he would be at the party, albeit as an invisible presence. And when the music stopped, he would come back. This was simply an opportunity he couldn't afford not to explore. Once more, he decided, if for nothing else, to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. Once more, he made the record player spin, and the tone arm was lowered back onto the outermost rim of the disc. This time he kept his eyes open. This time he was determined to watch, and see exactly what happened. But it didn't matter. For Jason, it was like falling asleep, and waking up inside of a dream. He didn't see anything change before his eyes. He didn't have an exact moment of realization that the world around him changed, and he was back at the party. He just slowly had a growing awareness that he was back. The lights, the couples dancing, the sights and sounds and smells were back, all around him, more vivid than ever. The first moment of him being there did not exist in his memory, any more than the first moments of a dream are able to be recalled. He simply steadily realized that he was back. And it was still almost as overwhelming as the last time, even though he had been expecting it. The people danced around him, as those on the sidelines talked and laughed and ate. Waiters in finery with silver platters holding exotic food skillfully maneuvered between the guests. Jason glanced down to see that once again he didn't have a body, he was once more an invisible presence. He moved about, slowly at first, then faster with more confidence. It was not unlike moving normally, but there was no sense of weight or momentum. He spun with the dancers, equally enjoying his sense of agility and invisibility now. Ordinarily he wasn't much of a dancer, he always felt foolish moving about in that way in front of people. But now neither clumsiness nor embarrassment were weighing him down, and he freely enjoyed the music. All about him were happy smiling faces, all except for one. Jason stopped after noticing a woman in a blue dress standing alone near the dance floor. She was smiling faintly, but it wasn't a real smile, it was a forced, tired smile. A smile one puts on when they want to hide their sadness in public. Though her mouth did its best to hide the woman's true emotions, her eyes did nothing of the sort. They were the saddest eyes Jason had ever seen. They were also the most beautiful. Jason stood transfixed by the woman. Her eyes, her face, her entire presence were by far the most angelic he had come across in his life. There were beautiful women in the world, Jason knew, that were not only attractive to him, but to just about every other man. Their features usually fit a sort of unspoken but agreed upon standard of beauty. They were, in a way, generically beautiful. And then there was this woman. It was as if her face had been hand-sculpted for him alone. No, it was more than that, it was as if she alone was his standard of beauty, that all other women in the world were beautiful only by how closely they resembled her.